Lunch phase can start now.
Right, shall I get going, yeah?
Yes. So, Peter, the floor is all yours. We are yours.
Thank you, Diego. Well, this time a year ago, I was in South America for this conference. So it's a very different experience now. But good to see you all again. So as I was saying, I've run panels like this at least 3 times, I think, in the last 18 months, discussing mass adoption, and the road to mass adoption, and what's required for mass adoption. And I kind of like have an evolving view of it, and therefore my questions have evolved with that. One of the things I've always talked about is that whilst people discuss mass adoption, we do have mass awareness. I don't know about you, Eric, or Rodolfo or Diego, but I don't tend to have any conversations these days where if someone asks what I do and I mention Bitcoin, they say, what is that? Everyone's kind of heard of it. But I think mass adoption is like a very interesting subject because some people are very keen on mass adoption to happen as quickly as possible, and some people aren't. But I think in some ways it's possibly better to go back a step and just kind of define what it means for you. So, Eric, I'll start with you. What does mass adoption actually mean to you?
Yeah, I think there's maybe three stages of mass adoption. The first one we've already hit, and that's kind of what you touched on, which is just awareness. Back in the old days, whenever I was in an Uber and I was talking to the driver and the word Bitcoin came up, they wouldn't even know what that word was, and I would have to repeat myself, and they would be confused about the term. And today, everyone has heard of it, at least in the Western world. So we're already there, and that's excellent. I think stage 2 is where, you know, a third to a half of the world has some and is comfortable holding some money or some value in this technology. And you know, that will happen over the next 5 years, I would say. And I think that's what people are really excited to see occur. And then the third phase is really where Bitcoin becomes, you know, the monetary standard of the world. That is the true mass adoption, and that's the final end game. We're still quite a ways away from that, but that's also, I would say, inevitable. So we'll get through all 3, but right now I'd say we're between 1 and 2.
Yeah, a third to a half of the people of the world owning some within 5 years. That's actually quite a bold prediction. That's potentially up to 4 billion people holding Bitcoin, whereas right now, I mean, it depends how you look at wallets and such, but we're not even at 1 billion. We're in likely the tens of millions range right now. So that's some pretty accelerated growth you're expecting over the next 5 years.
Yeah. You know, and maybe that takes 10 years, but it's 5 or 10 years. It's not 50 years.
Yeah, interesting. Rodolfo, do you have anything you want to add to that original point where I was asking, like, what does it mean to you? Does it mean anything different to you?
I think adoption is sort of like the wrong term to use. Like, adoption is something we use for like phone, like photo sharing apps, not for money. I think what happens with money is once it gains some momentum as a better store of value or a better medium of exchange, it forces the people that want to do commerce, people that want to store value, to using it instead of something else, right? It's almost like you're forced into using it because everything else is either failing at doing their job or just failing because literally they are failing, right? I think that's what happened to gold, for example, right? It's like gold failed as a standard because, you know, fiat was so much more efficient at a medium of exchange, right, and financialization as well. So I think what we're looking at now is a failure of store of value in USD or USD-based assets, right? I mean, like, bonds are going to shit, everything is going to shit, right? So much so that we see asset inflation everywhere. And to me, one of the best sort of canaries is when you have public traded companies which have extreme requirements, right, for what they can and can't do. And these guys also want to cover their ass, right? So they're often the last people to touch something that is new, especially for treasuries. And I think seeing now this public traded companies adding Bitcoin to their treasuries is a huge deal. It almost proves that Bitcoin is not some sketchy thing of the internet. It is not the volatility that's the problem. So none of the detracting factors that would normally make people avoid it, right? Aside from the people who want to speculate or have a problem with the government or, you know, all the other more fringe reasons. This is it, right? You know, I don't believe more than, say, 5 million people hold more than, you know, $50 worth of Bitcoin yet. So we're still sort of like pre-innovator on that curve of adoption. But the acceleration is just monumental, right? I mean, like, this is going to just accelerate and accelerate. And with that, it's going to create so much gravity that it's really going to start sucking everything around. So yeah, I think that's sort of like a better model to look at this. It's not like Bitcoin adoption, it's just the failure of the other alternatives.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We are seeing failure. We're seeing massive failure across the board. We're seeing massive inflation in certain countries. I think Turkey's at like 13%, and Argentina always is suffering from inflationary problems. And we have the threat of inflation here in the UK. I know in the US. As you said, bonds are going to shit. One thing I wasn't really prepared for this year, and I don't know if it was going to happen anyway, or it was part triggered by Michael Saylor's big move, but I didn't expect to see what was happening this year, this sudden massive move from billionaires taking interest in talking about Bitcoin and hedge funds and companies moving their treasuries in. It came as a bit of a surprise. My expectation was the next bull run was still just going to be another one driven by retail, and perhaps some companies would take interest. Did it take you by surprise as well, Eric?
A little bit, but let's keep things in perspective, because we've gotten very excited that you know, half a dozen or a dozen famous and very wealthy people have publicly endorsed or supported Bitcoin, which is great, because that's an infinite percent more than we're doing it 5 years ago. But still support a tiny fraction of the status quo. So it doesn't surprise me in that, you know, as Bitcoin survived the last to it again, and you know, that's fine. As you know, as was said, there's a certain amount of covering your ass that people in those positions have to do, especially with any kind of new technology, and especially when it's controversial and consequential as Bitcoin. So once the real swell of them will come once we're back in the real bull market and we're at all-time highs again, and then you'll start seeing everyone feel like they will be left out from a reputational basis if they don't endorse it and get on the bandwagon, and that's actually probably closer to the peak of the next bubble. So watch for that.
Diego, are you actually joining us for this conversation? I saw you pop in and out there. I can't even tell if he's part of this.
Even if you don't see me, I'm always here. I've been paying attention very, very closely to all the comments, because
just a quick question, Diego. As you sit there, dressed like part of the Kim dynasty, the rocket ship. We're seeing a lot of interest here with Bitcoin in the UK and certainly in the US. And I saw a chart recently it was like an animated video on Twitter recently, which was showing the inflows, and a lot of it is happening in the US. Are you seeing particular change there in Argentina and broadly across South America with the growth and interest in Bitcoin?
Well, I think but it's not the first wave for Argentina or Latin America, because it's like every time Bitcoin rises again, you know, you see the media covering it up, and then more people gets to know it. And what I realized over the years is that people get into Bitcoin because of the news. They stay because of the escape or the escape hatch that offers from the fragility of our economy. So what I realize is that people, I mean, the user base expands with the good news, but the actual adoption and usage expands with the crisis. But you need to have, and so we are having all those like cycles of expansion of the user base and then expansion of the usage in Latin America. And you have people already like sending money from Argentina to their families in Venezuela. So you already have these corridors of money using Bitcoin. And you were talking about one part. I think Bitcoin and it's serving two kind of very big groups of people. The people who needs to reserve value in the mid-long term, that has the ability to do so, that they can protect, they can store value for 2-3 years. That is not most of the population, it's maybe 20% at best of the population. And for them, it's an apolitical way of, and a censorship-resistant way of protecting their wealth against manipulation of the state and different things. But then you have the people who live in societies with economies that are so bad that even the Bitcoin volatility is very good for them to protect their wealth. So that's a very interesting thing of Bitcoin. It's serving two opposite ends of the society, if you will. For everybody else, it might be more ideological or something else. But for those two groups, it's providing unique value that nothing else can provide. But there are things that are evolving, and I think, I always think on mass adoption has two things. The driver is why this technology is providing value to you, to the end user, and then the friction, the stoppers for that to happen. And I think what we have been working on the last, I would say, 7 years, with the emergence of like smart contracts, payment channels, all these technologies that we are building on top of this base layer of a store of value, is basically working on removing the friction. The value we already found 2 or 3 places, as I said, remittance, store of value in the mid to long term, escaping shaky economy. So the value we already found out. Now we have been working all these years in removing the friction. And in my point of view, scaling was one of the big points of and Eric suffered those discussions. I was there too. So many of us suffer the turmoil that these tensions created. But, I think scaling was one of the things. But what I feel is that we are in the moment where the technology has evolved to a point where those problems are no longer there. And I think 2021 will be the year where we'll see most of these frictions get away from the whole ecosystem. Now, Bitcoin and the surrounded crypto economy. So I think the conditions for mass adoption are getting closer and closer, and I think that's why I'm all the way with Eric in the sense that I think 2-3 years from now, we will see that the crypto economies and the crypto infrastructure will be on par with the traditional fintech industry, but without the centralization points. So that will be a nice thing to see, and then we will see the real fight begin.
Yeah, Rodolfo, do you think adoption can happen too quick at times?
It really depends on from which side you're looking at, right?
Mm-hmm.
Retail was able to drive the last bull run because it was still very tiny, right? I mean, Bitcoin relative to other markets still dropped in the ocean of liquidity, right? But now you can't really have this bull run happen, say to 250 based on retail, right? It's just not enough money in the retail cohort for that. I think we need to see what happened with the on ramps for the average person to not get sort of priced out, right? Because people, even though you can buy 1 millionth of a Bitcoin, right, or 100 million of a Bitcoin, people are still going to feel priced out, right? So if the price rises too fast, it's kind of like, the bull run all the way to $33. Right? It's like everybody was like, oh my God, right? It's like, I'm going to dump my Bitcoin at $33, right? Because it's like, it's obvious that this thing is not going to go any higher. And it's very unfortunate that like the psychology of price numbers really sort of plays at that. I think that the thing that might help a lot the market on this next run is if the consumer exchanges start to price things in satoshis. That might help a lot, because then it's an inverse number. You want to start seeing the number of the amount of dollars getting smaller, and you know they're going to start, they can't compare themselves anymore to a public company coming into the space, and buying 20,000 coins, right? It's like that disparity is sort of like that has sort of moved on. Yeah.
But you raise a good point. You raise a good point because, I make as much effort as I can to explain the virtues of Bitcoin to my friends and have them consider it. And over the years, like, it's been different questions, but right now the first question always is, I'm too late. It's $20,000. This really does put a lot of people off. It's always the first thing I have to deal with and explain a fraction. And, if I thought it would peaked, I would be selling, et cetera, et cetera. But that movement to considering pricing and allowing people to buy Satoshis does come with that extra complication, because people thinking they're buying Bitcoin and then they're buying Satoshis. And we saw the big discussion this last few days about bits, etc. Eric, you're an exchange operator. Do you price in Satoshis? Is it something you've considered?
No, I think for many people that would be additionally confusing. I think end state of Bitcoin, people will tend to start talking in sats, but from my own observations, that tends to be only something that Bitcoiners do when they've been in the world for a while, not what normies do when they're first starting to learn. And certainly some people think that they're too late, or like the $20,000 number is too high, so it pulls them away. But I don't know that that's that strong of a force, right? Like a quick conversation with those people and they will start to understand it. And when it goes up another 2x from there, they will understand it. They will get pulled into that regardless. I do think, though, that even though the high price is harmful to the superficial observation of a retail buyer, it's helpful to the superficial observation of an institutional buyer.
Right.
They need that higher liquidity. They're not scared by $20,000 because they're going to buy, tens of millions of them. And so they've been waiting for this market actually to become more liquid, and they don't think that they're too late. They've been waiting for it to catch up to their pools of capital and size. So yeah, what we may lose in retail buyers, we may gain in institutional buyers, and that's all fine.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point as well. I was speaking to one investor person. They said the problem with a lot of institutional investors is that the market's too small for them to invest in.
Yeah.
They can't actually invest in until the price reaches about $50,000, because it needs to be essentially getting towards $1 trillion market. And that was something that hadn't crossed my mind. And we talk a lot about institutional investors, and there's a lot more institutional money coming in now. I'll start with you, Eric, and then I'll go to you, Rodolfo, because I'd be interested in both your perspectives on this. But do you have any kind of thoughts, fears of there being a massive rush of institutional money coming in, and this maybe it doesn't price out the retail investor, but it just kind of edges them out, and this just becomes a coin that is dominated by institutional money? Is there any downside to that?
If I'm being honest, it probably will be a coin that is dominated by institutional money, because that's where most money is held. So that's not a flaw of Bitcoin. That's just how markets tend to pool resources and liquidity. What we as Bitcoiners should make sure to do is to constantly remind people that it does not matter what others are doing with their Bitcoin or who else is involved. It's an open system that anyone can be part of and can participate in, whether it's $1 or whether it's $100,000 per Bitcoin. The system works the same way. people's rights and access and powers over the system are all the same. And so it's really the character of how the system works does not change at any given price level. And if we do a good job of helping people understand that phenomena, then I think that'll be well served.
How about you, Rodolfo?
Yeah, it's the way I like to put it is the little guy can still front run Warren Buffett, and and the little guy is going to probably still be able to front run Buffett for another 5 years because he's going to be the last guy coming in, like he did with Apple. And it's a big world out there, right? I mean, even if we have 1 million institutions, right, holding a ton of coin, it's still very little, right? This doesn't end. There is no top, right, for the acquisition of Bitcoin by anybody, really, aside from the psychology of the price. So the problem with retail, though, the more conservative retail and the more conservative institutions, is that they're not thinking like us, right? We're thinking in terms of the dollar ending and Bitcoin replacing dollar and gold, right? Or some mix of that, right? Bitcoin being a monumental part of the world economy. They're thinking in terms of like, at what price do I sell the Bitcoin? So people who are thinking in terms of what price do I sell the Bitcoin are the people who are concerned about today's price, or if they are at the top of this cycle, right? Once you get out of that thinking mindset, you're thinking just in terms of exiting fiat, right? Then it doesn't matter, right? Like if you're thinking, like 3 cycles, however cycles is going to take for us to clear out, right? The USD, which is the goal. It's really sort of like more where you have to go. I think I don't think we're gonna, until these people are willing to sort of start looking at this from this perspective. You're gonna just keep on seeing this sort of like a more trader mentality as opposed to a truly sort of switching to Bitcoin.
But Rodolfo, is there not an argument that as, say, currencies collapse and let's say, I don't know, institutions move their money in first, that we could see a shift in the power and the distribution of money? You don't see that as an issue?
Oh, so this is the beautiful part about Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is your enemy's money, right? You want as many different types and sizes of entities having as much as possible. Right.
Okay.
So you want China to have a ton of Bitcoin, right? The Chinese government, right? You want the U.S. government to have a ton of it, right? You want large entities like BlackRock to have a ton of it because they will have different sets of preferences, right? And they'll have different sets of rules and different types of local issues, so that they prevent each other from getting their way, right? So you create a tug of war, right, where nothing changes, and that's the best outcome for Bitcoin, is nothing changing.
Yeah,
Right.
To go off that a little bit, let's imagine if all Bitcoin adoption and the vast majority of what Bitcoin was being held was just retail investors, which is maybe true today, but let's say that was going forward how it worked. The danger to Bitcoin from governments, I think, would be higher, because they would more easily be able to vilify it in the eyes of those retail users. In a world where there are very powerful companies, financial institutions that also own Bitcoin, those are precisely the people that have influence within government. And they will, to some degree, be a helpful bulwark against government trying to vilify it, because no longer can they just scare a bunch of retailers to dump it. They would be going against the interests of the organizations that are actually funding them. So that's why it is important, I think, to have institutions on board and large companies on board. And the greater the mix and diversity of holders, the better.
Sorry.
No, you go.
These entities will unlikely shoot themselves in the foot, right? So you want politicians to hold Bitcoin because they don't want their bags to become illegal. Right. So by all means, get your representative to own a lot of Bitcoin.
But also, one thing that for me is key is that Bitcoin is not about avoiding concentration of power or money. I think concentration of power is part of of human development. It's like if you create a lot of value for society, very likely you will manage to get a concentration of power. The thing is, it's about not changing the rules of how power is like distributed and regained. No, so if I, you have concentration in power in Bitcoin, and somebody has a lot of Bitcoins, but they don't do a good usage of those Bitcoins, they will lose them. The Bitcoins are not going, they cannot change the rules of Bitcoin, add inflation or do something else to regain the power they lost because of mismanagement. And I think Bitcoin is about that. It's about protecting the social contract on value between people. And I think that's something that people were saying, no, Bitcoin will create like better, fair distribution of wealth. That's not the case. Bitcoin is a tool, the rules of distribution, but as a tool, it cannot be corrupted. And I think that's what we are, I mean, that's what we should be selling, so to call it, to the new users. It's like, here the rules will be respected. It's like the value you put here will be preserved and very likely increase, but at least you know the rules are not going to be changed.
Yeah. And Rodolfo, are you therefore also, it must be playing on your mind then that, as Bitcoin grows, if we had a quite significant year next year, say we hit $100,000, something ridiculous, $150,000, we're going to see a lot of mainstream media coverage. We're going to see the kind of excitement that we had in 2017 and that you probably saw in 2013 and previous years. That's going to bring the regulatory lens over it, going to have governments look at it. I guess the point you were saying is if China, for some reason, was holding a lot of Bitcoin, even if it was confiscated, they may also, therefore, be holding a significant amount of value. So they themselves would not want to destroy it.
Exactly, right?
You're destroying that value.
Exactly, right? It's in your let's say alchemism exists, and then you somehow figure out how to make gold out of thin air, based and very cheaply, right? It's in your interest to not push it too far, right? Because if you push it too far, you're going to devalue it. We saw this through history of every single asset that ever existed. It gets inflated, right? I mean, government just cannot help themselves. The difference is that Bitcoin is self-verifiable, right? You simply cannot cheat the Bitcoin supply, right? Period. So it is in their interest, right, to keep, and each country is going to keep each other honest that way too, right? Because users can keep them honest. They can keep users honest. I think that the tentative capture won't come through inflation. You come through like seizures and 60102s, that kind of stuff. That's how you probably see the attempt at captures. However, this time around, all a citizen needs is 24 words to leave. Right? So back in the day, if you were an aristocrat in Europe, you had your little feudal area or, your state. Let's say a war is coming, right? And your side lost. So what you do is you take your pictures off the wall, you put the gold in your wood crates, you pack the family, you take all the stuff and you go to adjacent state and you wait it out there and then you make a land claim once the war is over, right? And then you sort of come back, you hang your painting, you put the gold in the basement, right? Now, if you're the little guy, the villager guy, right, you're just fucked. There is nothing for you left there, and they're going to take everything you have, and possibly your sons too, because they need people for their army. Now, with Bitcoin, every single person, doesn't matter how much or little they have, they can just take their 24 words and leave. And when they're leaving, even if they're strip searched, they cannot find these coins, right? So it starts to become, you remove the seizure power from government, right? It's going to work out differently in some place. Some place they're going to put a gun to your kid's head and you're going to probably give out some of that money, but it starts to change the dynamic. And that dynamic change is what I don't know how the world plays out.
Yeah. How do you feel about that, Eric?
Yeah, the democratization of of control over money is really like the essence of what Bitcoin has done. Money has perhaps a rightfully deserved reputation as benefiting the wealthy. And I think the people see that as not just that it benefits them because they have more of it, but it benefits them because when they have more of it, they're able to change the rules of the game, and they're able to have access to protection and information that normal people wouldn't. And in Bitcoin, being open source software, being borderless, being something that anyone can just Google and learn about, and when you can hold $10 or $10 million on 12 seed words, that's incredibly powerful, and it's just as powerful for the peasant as it is for the king. And to bring that to the world and to give everyone equal authority over something as important as money, I think is really the special element that Bitcoin has brought.
So this week, Eric, I've under duress from a few people, I've started reading The Sovereign Individual. I'm a few chapters in, loving it. I think it's great. I have questions, of course. But one thing that really stood out to me in the book was quite early on, where it talks about Bitcoin transcending conventional thinking. And it's going to become important for people to understand Bitcoin as early as possible to protect their wealth and protect their businesses. Because if we do go through a transitional period, and like Rodolfo said earlier, people will converse around the best form of money. So if it is almost like a natural evolution of money in society that we move to a Bitcoin-based economy, there are some people who are going to get left behind because they're not able to bridge that kind of conventional thinking. So when we talk about adoption, I guess we're going to have the adoption that we have now, that people are recognizing the value of Bitcoin and taking the risk. And then later on, we're going to have those who I guess are going to be forced into adopting it because people are going to turn around to them and say, I don't want your dollars. I don't want your pounds. You have to pay me in Bitcoin. Do you see that? Like, how do you see that part of the journey?
Yeah, well, I certainly wish that everyone could just like wake the hell up and understand the value of this stuff all together at once. And I've been trying to convey it to people for close to a decade at this point, and it is depressing how unable or uninterested most people are in learning about it. The sole thing that really gets people's attention is the price. Mm-hmm. And you can spend an hour trying to tell someone why this is such an important new financial system for the world. Or they can have like $5 of it and see it go up to $7. That second case is what they will pay attention to. And so I've just realized to embrace that and to just allow that process to happen. People have to come to this in their own way. And fortunately, once people get hooked on the price action, a lot of them do start learning more about it. And that's this rabbit hole concept that we all talk about. But at this point, there's not really an excuse for people who still don't understand it. Like 2013, it was very understandable if someone hadn't heard about it or didn't understand how it worked. This is 2020 now. This is like a $300 billion asset that's been around for a decade and is the single greatest investment since it's existed. And to not be aware of what is going on, at some point, that's on you. That's on the person who's remained willfully ignorant, even though the evidence is all around them that something important is happening.
Are you perhaps being a little bit harsh there? Because
yes,
at the same time, yeah. Well, do you know what? Because I was thinking about that recently, and then I was thinking, well, I've never owned gold, and I know this is better gold, but I've just never owned it. And perhaps, for example, when I was out in South America last year, and Diego will know this, it's a lot easier to talk to people in Argentina. When you explain it's money that can't be seized, they're like, what? When you explain to them it's money that can't be inflated, they're like, yeah, I want this. Perhaps it's like the slow, insidious destruction of our currencies in the places like the US and the UK that means we've kind of been institutionalized with this.
And it's, this is probably true in Europe, but certainly in the US, there is a blindness, a blind trusting of authority of the government. And because money is of the government, there is a certain default pass that people give to dollars. they assume dollars are money, that they must be money, that they're the best money, because they live in the best country in the world, of course. And so they just don't think about the characteristics of money or why there needs to be anything else. And so this weird Bitcoin thing comes along and they just dismiss it. And yeah, I am being harsh, but even with my own friends and family, there are a number of them that, no close friends or family, but acquaintances that still just don't get it. And I don't know what to do about them anymore because I've been trying to tell them for years. And it's on them at that point. You got to just kind of be a humble and curious human. And any humble and curious human that comes across Bitcoin is going to become interested and fascinated by it relatively quickly.
Rodolfo, is Eric being unfair here? Because it's
I
quite
think-
a big leap to go from hearing about Bitcoin to trying to understand this new paradigm of money.
No, it's perfectly fair. See, the problem is Bitcoin still does not change human nature, right? And most people don't want personal responsibility, right? Bitcoin is the ultimate stand in personal responsibility of store of value, right? There is some shades of it, right? You can have custodial, so at least you have the value, so you lose at least the freedom of it. There is some nuance there, but still, you can only take a horse to the water, right? I mean, you can't force people, and I indoctrination does play a role in it, but I think most people are just they seek that indoctrination because it's less responsibility, it's less it's less work, right? People are busy running their lives too, right? Like it's not like some malicious or dumb thing or whatever. It's just the way it is, right? The ratio of people that gets screwed by any sort of thing, it's always going to be similar. Doesn't matter what the thing is. So, we're just going to move from banking with USD, right, to say Coinbase, Bitcoin, and like you're going to have a lot of people who are going to get screwed, not because Coinbase is nefarious, going to run away the money, but because they're going to play along with the state and they're going to seize a lot of Bitcoins, or there might be some negative interest removed from their Coinbase accounts. Who knows, right, how this stuff plays out. But most people are not going to want to sort of run their own nodes, so they have self-validation, have their own hardware wallet so that they don't get taken. It's just how people are. I think that the key here, and this to me is the monumental shift in civilization, is that it is now possible for anyone of any type, of any background, of anything, right, to be free, to be able to retain their value. That was simply never possible before. Even if gold, somebody, they take it from you, right? You need a forklift to carry real amounts of gold out. But with Bitcoin, you're now you're capable to be self-sovereign.
That's fair. All right, Diego.
Yeah, on the gold point,
Okay.
there are a lot of people in many countries around the world that do use that to be self-sovereign.
Sure.
They hold gold in various ways. Sometimes it's not a lot, but there is especially in India, there is a culture of ownership of that as a hedge against perpetual debasement. And I think it's precisely those cultures which will be more understanding and open to a form of money that can't be debased, because they kind of live that already.
So India is interesting because the government in the last few years has shifted, right? So they're trying to sort of westernize their economy and everything. So they're coming hard against gold. They're coming hard against savings. They're trying to get people to not be self-sovereign. And it's, the farmer strikes now. And, it's like things are really sort of on fire in India because there is this big sort of friction now between the old way of sort of like having some self-sovereignty monetarily and sort of being forced into this garbage fiat that they have.
So Diego, we've only got a few minutes left, so it's kind of
Yeah.
like a last question to each of you, but I'll start with you first. So if we've all tried to tell our friends and encourage them and speak about the virtues of Bitcoin and they've all ignored us, is mass adoption one of these things that we don't really therefore need to worry about? It's just something we just need to sit along and watch and enjoy the ride.
I think mass adoption comes when you have a usage of the technology that everybody needs and is willing to adopt. It's like with the internet, I was evangelizing with the internet, with the web since 1995 until 1998, 1999. And the same thing that Eric did, was mentioning before with Bitcoin, like, I lost hundreds of hours. Well, I didn't thought I was losing them back then, but then I realized like my influence was maybe a few hundred people that understood, or a few, dozens of people that really understood the potential of the web. But suddenly Hotmail appeared, and suddenly people could communicate with their families back home and send messages all over the place, and that was it. It's like web email, like having a better way to communicate with family and friends. That was enough to trigger mass adoption. And I think we are still searching for that tool in our space, or that killer app in our space. Once we find it, and we have found very good usages. No, I mean, remittance-wise, I think Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies are the best remittance tool you can have in the world now. We have a store of value. Bitcoin has proven to be an amazing store of value, mid to long-term store of value. So we have some wins, but we haven't found that universal use case that people need and will be willing. And once that happens, we won't even have to talk about blockchain, Bitcoin, crypto. Any of these will matter. People will just use it, and on the background, all these technologies will be there. As Eric said, yeah.
Have we not found the killer use case? Like, Eric, do you not think the killer use case is the protection against debasement?
That is a killer use case, and has clearly found product market fit.
Yeah.
But those who are using that have taken several steps down a road that I think are challenging for most people. The people who are using it for that have acknowledged that fiat currencies may be problematic. And just making that step is a lot of friction. So those who have gotten over that step, I think, have found that use case, and it is certainly a killer use case for anyone who has made that step. But most people haven't made that step yet. And that's why the store of value use case is not something that has taken this global yet. I think it will, but it'll be a while.
Well, perhaps that killer use case becomes more and more obvious over the next year to 5 years. I mean, we just lost 1.2%, I think, in the value of the pound overnight. So I think when people start to see it, a bit maybe like people seen in Argentina, where they start to see it happen quite quickly in Western nations. But I think that perhaps is a killer use case. Rodolfo, we've got about 90 seconds left. I'm going to let you finish us off. Have we got a killer use case of Bitcoin?
I think we're using it for it. So number go up is the best adoption feature that there is, right? I mean, like, it plays right to how humans work. And so we're Trojan horsing appreciation, and we're sort of, and we're covertly giving them freedom. I think it's like, it does not get better than this, right? I mean, it's amazing. So let the FOMO do its job, and everything else will come, right? Like, all other Bitcoin features serve at the pleasure of store of value. They all enable store of value at the end of the day.
All right. Well, listen, that was a great session. It's always good to see you all, especially you, Diego, because Diego, it was a year ago we were hanging out, and I haven't had a chance to see you again. I haven't had a chance to see most of you, though, but a great session. I agree that the number go up is very interesting. I expect as it goes bananas next year and we start to see, maybe we'll have our first 10K in a day. We'll start to see a lot of people come in. I know my friends will suddenly be like, oh, am I too late? Blah, blah, blah. So, but no, great to see you all. Great to talk to you all.
That's rinse and repeat for all of us.
Yeah, I know. But I expect I'll see you all soon, and take care, and good luck to you all.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you, guys.